everyone, and thank you for joining us here on the Recruitment Roundup podcast, which is brought to you by BMS Performance. For those of you that are joining us for the first time, BMS Performance is a specialist sales and marketing recruitment consultancy. For the last 30 years, we've been helping businesses across the UK recruit for vacancies at every level. I'm your host, Mike Leather, and every week I'll be joined by a new guest where we'll get stuck into the latest trends in regards to recruitment. We'll talk about insights, we share ideas, we share experiences, and ultimately we look to provide value to fundamentally help you, whether or not you're a hiring manager, a business leader, or part of an internal talent team, to recruit smarter, faster, and more effectively. Today, I am joined by my colleague and one of the best in the business, Mr. Rob Coombs. Welcome to the show, Rob.
Hello, thanks ever so much for having me.
All right, delighted to have you on. As you know, as is customary, we're going to kick off by you introducing yourself, what you do at BMS. The nice question: why did you decide to jump into recruitment in the first place?
So I'm one of our market development managers at BMS within our technical division. So ultimately, my role, as well as being a senior national account manager, is to lead and drive the technical recruitment function within our organisation across construction, manufacturing, industrial sectors, and make sure we're making the right partnerships, focusing on the right emerging markets, etc., and of course, coaching and developing the team. I've been at BMS for coming up to 9 years in June. And I got into recruitment off the back of, my primary career focus being in the army and at Sandhurst, not quite going to plan. And recruitment was always something that post-university, between joining the army, that I was looking at. So I thought it was a natural step. Came to BMS Performance on one of our graduate assessment days to get involved with potential opportunities with some certain businesses that the BMS were recruiting for at the time. And instead, ended up being snapped up to work for BMS instead, and never looked back since.
You're one of the rare ones that actually had their eye on recruitment. Not many people do.
No.
Not many people do at all. They're generally something that they fall into and then realise that they're pretty good at it.
Or not, as the case sometimes is as well. Yeah, absolutely.
Cool. All right. Well, you're an old timer. Like me, so this should be a good conversation. So this will be the first episode that airs in the new financial year. So we thought it would be useful to chat about what emerging trends that we saw in 22-23, how they may or may not continue in 23-24, and also finish off with a few actionable takeaways for the audience in regards to how they might be able to best position themselves to recruit in 23-24, which is sure to be an interesting year. But Rob, let's kick off then by talking about 22-23. And I think the easiest way to do this will be to split it up, talking about the candidate side, also the client side. So we start with the candidates. What changed in 22-23? Just keeping it broad to start off with, from a candidate side in your experience.
I think it's good that we're starting from a candidate perspective, because ultimately it's been very candidate led and driven, and a lot of recruiters, companies, commentators have used that phrase a lot, and that's been driven a lot by an increase in salaries. Is the biggest thing that changed in the last 12 months as we came out of that post-pandemic world. I mean, from looking at the figures from the ONS, but the last quarter just gone, between December and February of this year, on average across the private sector in the UK, there's a 7% average on basic salaries, and that's not including bonuses as well overall. So that's been quite a big thing. Obviously, the cost of living piece has exacerbated that. And very rarely are we seeing applicants, or have seen applicants, moving from one job that they're comfortable in, let's say, to another one for the same money or less. Ultimately, back in the, when I first started in recruitment, on target earnings and bonus was the be all and end all. Now it's basic salary, guaranteed earnings, let's call it, based on performance and things of that ilk. That's been a big change. As well as money, the wider package has been a big piece as well. And that's usually manifested itself in three ways. So vehicles. Again, when I started in recruitment 9 years ago, driving around in a BMW 5 Series, 4 Series, or the top of the range Audi was the be all and end all sales professionals. Now it's, I must have electric, I must have hybrid. I'm thinking about the benefit in kind or car allowance because I'm already in a car agreement. And ultimately, that has been a big change. With that as well, car allowance schemes, some of them have been paying the same as they did back in 2015, 16, 17. And that's been a change as well.
Yeah,
what have you seen on that?
Pretty much the same. If I look across the team overall and the work that we've done, I think there's a couple of things that are striking. Definitely the inflation in salaries. I think from the first 2 quarters of 22-23, it seemed like they were just rising. I would say they've probably started to settle a little bit more towards the end of the end of Q4. I think you probably agree with that as well. Companies are definitely having to pay more now to attract sales and talent than what they did do pre-COVID. That won't change, but I think the increase in salary inflation is slowed down somewhat. But converse to that, you've got candidates who they are doing well in roles and they're not actively looking at moving jobs, and if they are, like you said, they're looking for pay rises of 5-10k to move. So that's been a big change from a candidate perspective. And I think again on the benefits side, we've seen more offers turned down this year 100% than we've done in previous years due to company car options, namely lack of electric vehicles, hybrids, or you've seen candidates who have had that benefit in another role and then considering their options with regards to accepting an offer because the offer on the table doesn't quite come with that benefit. I think another big one as well, which has been really amplified this year, is companies that are offering 20 days holidays.
Absolutely, that was going to be my second point.
It seems to have struggled. Candidates are really pushing for flexible working. As we know, a lot of people now are only ever used to flexible working. If they're a second job or they've got a couple of years of experience, so benefits absolutely have been a more pertinent topic and a real driver for candidates, and that's something that's been more of an emerging trend this year. I think 100%. What about what have you seen in how candidates go about their job search? Like, what's changed from that standpoint?
But behavior has absolutely altered, and obviously the pandemic was the catalyst for that, as is this candidate driven market. What we've seen as a business and what we can see on LinkedIn through people's conversations is that ultimately candidates, applicants, people have got so many more options than they ever had before the pandemic, etc. And as a result, they don't need to apply to adverts as much as they did before. They don't need to be putting their CVs on the job boards, etc. because people like us, direct companies, in-house recruitment teams, networks are contacting them to offer those opportunities because obviously there's a lack of people, which we'll go on to shortly. And as a result of this, dearth of opportunity, their behavior has not only changed because now they're more informed than ever because they can do everything that they need to online or have reviews and all that kind of stuff. It's so easy to be put in front of a client, but also because of how quickly companies are having to move to attract and get this talent, get their paws on them, so to speak. Candidate behavior has changed in regards to interview preparation as well. And we've seen that massively. And that's taken a lot of companies, hiring companies, by surprise. And what I mean by that is that they haven't really moved with or been agile with the fact that candidates have got 3, 4, 5 interviews, sometimes with the advent of Teams and online interviews. These are being sorted out within 24 and arranged within 24 hours of applying. Whereas Pre-pandemic, it might take a week or two. So therefore, there is time to prepare. Candidate interview preparation is therefore not as in depth, which means the dynamic and fast-paced companies that are recruiting are having to sell more, give more information on those conversations, as well as getting information back. And that has completely changed the dynamic of the recruitment process in the last 12 months, in my opinion, and I think most of our colleagues' opinion from work they've been doing this year.
Yeah, 100%. Candidates become much more selective, not only about how they go about the job search, but the types of companies that they'll be interested in, that they'll talk to. Partly because what you've said as well, they're much more informed now. But we've definitely got a change in the behaviour of how candidates do go about the job search, and it's not anymore that candidates will just go and apply for an advert. A lot of them are passive, which we've talked about a lot on previous podcasts. What about from client side? What trends did you see emerge in 2023?
Well, no moving away from it. It's been tough for hiring companies, and that has been driven by this shift in what we call a candidate-driven market, which has been this really odd cocktail. One that obviously I've only been in this game for 9 years, which sounds like a long time, but haven't seen this before. A cocktail of, the ONS telling us that there are more payrolled employees in the UK right now than there ever has been in history. But at the same token, there are less active available people in the workforce, i.e. people of working age that are active or that, are able to work, that aren't incapacitated for whatever reason, which again has been exacerbated by COVID. On top of that, you've got more job vacancies than there ever has been in the UK throughout the year. Now that has gone down, and of course it's going down every month, every quarter, but don't be fooled by that, because as of the last quarter, January to March of 2023, there were 328,000 more vacancies across the UK, across all sectors, than there were in the same period in 2020. So even though there are less vacancies in the market, there's still so many vacancies out there, and unemployment rates are the lowest they've been since Thatcher. And throwing all that in there means that it's been super difficult for clients to recruit. And as a result, they've had to change their behaviours, just like candidates' behaviour has changed. And they've therefore gone down the route of potentially looking to hire from outside of their traditional norms.
Yeah. Okay. Interesting. And what have you seen in terms of the interview process? How have clients had to adapt on that front?
A lot of them have, and a lot of them are doing so, and a lot of them just have not. And that's the nature of being human, isn't it? We're always resistant to change and want to do path of least resistance. But ultimately, companies that have always been used to having a large talent pool to pick from, having time to then interview lots of people at first and then have a short list of anywhere between 2 and 4 or 5 people for second interviews, those days in the last 12 months have gone. And companies have had to be okay with having one person at final stage interview. And that has made a lot of people...
That's a mindset shift in itself, though, isn't it?
Massive. Made people feel so uncomfortable making perceived obviously they are big commercial decisions based on one thing, and as a human we want to benchmark, we want to know what we could have worn, that fear of missing out. And companies that have done really well at recruiting in the last 12 months have embraced that change and made that leap of faith and trusted in that people or whatever, and made sure it works. Whereas those that tend to miss out are the ones that ultimately go, we'll wait to see what else is there. And by the time they've done that, their preferred applicant has already gone elsewhere. It's been a really tough one for companies.
Yeah, because I think if I look back at 22, 23, we've never been at a point where we could say the candidate drivenness of the market, if that's even a word, has got to like a midpoint of a range where you've got candidate driven on one side and employer driven on the other side. And what you just said in your first point then about the employment rate in the UK, we've always been in a position where in our world, in sales recruitment land, where there's been more vacancies than there has been good talent to actually fill them. And that's manifested itself massively in interview processes, recruitment processes, where you've had companies where they've not recruited since 2019. They've come to market and thought, well, brilliant, I'm looking forward to having 2-3 people at the end of a process, and it's been an ongoing dialogue we've had to have with them to support and advise them in that. Market conditions now mean that you might only have one person, so that means that the actual interview process itself and what you take them through possibly has to adapt as well, because there might not be as many people in the market, and that's sometimes not even if they're only considering recruiting from the industry sector. Sometimes even when they open it up, it doesn't open the floodgates massively. So I think that's definitely been a change that I've saw in the psyche of hiring managers. I think on the flip side of that though as well, what we've also seen a lot, and I'm sure you'd agree with this from the clients that you'd work for, that clients have looked more now for closer recruitment partnerships.
Absolutely. I mean, if you look at your LinkedIn feeds, right? And maybe this is the algorithm working for me, and I'm connected with a lot of recruiters and a lot of businesses out there, but that shift from volume-based market that we worked in 2014, 15, 16, 17, thank the Lord in some regards, and a lot of regards, has moved into those closer partnerships and extension of working with businesses and companies that realize that using 2, 3, 4, 5 agencies like they may have done when the market was the other way around and there were so many candidates and it was a case of, right, well, let's get the best of the big bunch. Well, ultimately, by working closer, companies have focused in on that small talent pool, not diluting it too much, getting the best out of it, attracting it, not cutting corners and doing a fastest finger first approach. And it's worked well for a lot of businesses. And also it's been great from a candidate journey as well, because as we've touched on, they've got 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 opportunities being spoken to them from all angles. And if their candidates we're finding as well are ending up working with less recruiters because of this and the candidate journey, the company journey, it's better for everybody. One of those things that ultimately has pushed people down that, as you've said there, is identifying talent from outside of their own sectors and having to think about the bigger picture. And if they, i.e. the hiring company, haven't had that experience before, they have trusted one recruitment partner, sometimes two, in order to help them on that journey. And now they're better than they were in 2019 and much better prepared for it. So it's been a great shift, obviously for our industry, but it's been a great shift for those hiring companies that have struggled because they've been able to access a knowledge base and support that they thought might have not been available to them before.
Yeah, there's I think that there's always, I would say always, but commonly a client might think, well, if we use 4 recruiters, I'm going to get access to a wider pool of talent, when usually the reverse is true. By showing more commitment, you get more commitment back, which means access to a wider pool of talent. But not to labour on that point too much. Do you want to talk about on this particular subject, because we started off the candidate piece talking about inflation in terms of salaries. How have companies, in your experience, adapted to that as well? What trends have you seen coming through there?
What we've seen a lot of is the re-rise of the counter offer. It is quite fair to say. We have had periods in the last 12 months where we've had a laugh and a joke about it. I mean, we can laugh and a joke about it now, but at the time it was pretty horrific. But there is some quite ridiculous figures being thrown about there to keep hold of people. And sometimes that's companies not realizing, they're realizing too late that they haven't gone with the times and inflated salaries to keep their best people, and therefore they've had to cash dump, which we all know in 6 months' time, the underlying reasons you're looking to leave a company are still going to be there, and therefore it just kicks the can down the road. But what we're also then finding is that companies are having to compete even more against obviously their peers and their competitors, and therefore having to pay more and do other things with those packages that we touched on before. But counter offers has been an interesting one. One of the biggest pieces of advice I've been giving to companies, I might not even be working with them, is to say, right, when you get to the end of that or towards the end of that process, make sure you know what that person's got in there or what the likelihood is of them being counter offered. So you've got 2 pieces there. You've got What are their current employer going to do to keep hold of them? And what other companies are they interviewing with that are going to be pulling them from a different direction? And that has been a trend in the last 12 months that a lot of hiring businesses have really struggled to understand. And a lot of it is a case of, oh, well, what will be. But that's not going to help you and your sales team hit your ever increasing targets with a smaller sales force, which I'm sure is something we'll talk about shortly.
Yeah, definitely. I think this year definitely we saw kind of an accumulation on this particular point of the previous years. So you had companies who hadn't given pay rises to people since COVID. Their people then might have been underpaid relative to the external market. Then when they've tried to recruit outside of the market sector, they found it hard because their current people who are doing that job aren't on what they need to pay to get talent. And then they're competing against all these other employees as well who can pay more. So it's been a work in progress. I think a lot of companies now are getting there, but it's been tough, and it's definitely been a trend that we've seen this year. And just to round off on this point and tie a bow on it effectively, how many of these trends overall would you say have been positive, and which ones do you think will continue in this new financial year?
Definitely from a positive perspective, it's around the recruitment process. And it's about embracing technology. It's about embracing the fast-paced nature of what us as a society expect these days, and being dynamic with recruitment processes and changing it from the way it used to be. That's, I think, a massive positive. And I expect a large element of that to stay. We are getting a lot more now face-to-face first stage interviews, which actually is quite refreshing, but has its own challenges. We could make a whole podcast on that. But that's, positive, and I expect to stay. The salary and package piece, again, positive is the embracing of the wider package. Company cars being changed to hybrids or better car allowances. The embracing of holiday or working from home or wellness days or whatever it might be. Companies really investing in pensions and healthcare and those wider flexible benefits that are important to families, especially in a cost of living crisis. That's all really good. Do I expect that salary rise to continue? As we've touched on, it started to get to a point now where it is leveling out. There will be obviously instances where that happens, but there's, as we can say, a lot of positives to come out the last 12 months, and it doesn't feel like it, but there are definitely.
Yeah, 100%. Okay. So Rob, so the next point that we're going to cover is what we think we might see in 23-24 and the early portion of 23-24. Now, for the audience that are listening, we haven't got a crystal ball, so if none of what we say comes true, then don't hold it against us. But these points now are based on our experiences of what we've seen last year and what we think we might see this year. So Rob, what are you expecting to see in the early part of financial year 23-24 in terms of emerging trends?
Well, the first point I wanted to make is one that's not new. Happens every year, 2 or 3 points during the year, and it catches companies weirdly by surprise at this time every year, and that's April resignations. And I say it weirdly because a lot of businesses do have annual bonus schemes. Obviously, this is the first podcast of the new financial year, and a lot of businesses will pay their end of year bonuses either in March or April. And then guess what happens? People resign once they've got their cash because of the way that their bonus structure works. And, people don't want to miss out on the last 12 months of graft. So there's definitely going to be a lot of pressure on hiring, and it's always the most competitive quarter. So that's not really something that's new, but it's a trend for I want our listeners to be aware of.
Press pause on that point then. So, because it's an important one and it's almost a bit of an uncomfortable one, but the reality is, it does happen. We do see it every year. What could companies be doing or hiring managers be doing potentially to mitigate it? Now, what have you seen work with your clients in the past?
Great question. So the first thing, and it's not very easy to do if you're a massive corporate, it's probably easier to do if you're an SME, but it's ultimately change your bonus scheme for your salespeople. Make it quarterly. So then the impact of one big annual bonus is less. And therefore, you're not going to have this glut in April, May time, potentially, or make it monthly, So then that takes the edge off. Yes, that gives your people potentially more of an easy way out earlier on in the year, because it's less of an impact to them, but at the same token you're less likely to have the same problem in April and May. But outside of doing things like that, it's bringing potentially those reviews forward, trying to identify those problems earlier, try and understand how happy they are through surveys or whatever it might be, having regular package reviews. And when I say package, I'm not just on about salary. I'm on about the bigger picture, understanding the short, medium, and long-term aspirations of your people, and if they don't match up, then there's a red flag, so you can prepare for it and get ahead of that curve. So they're just a few of those things that a lot of my clients have talked to me about and have implemented.
Okay, cool. What else are you expecting to see?
Well, the other thing, apart from resignations, we are seeing and have seen some redundancies in certain sectors, tech sector being the big one, because apparently they were perceived to have overhired during the pandemic, which was horses for courses, really, because that was the biggest growth sector. And we don't quite know what that will mean for companies that are hiring, but could mean there's low-hanging fruit. It could mean, though, there is an increased pressure on existing sales teams to attack that market share. And what we have seen in the last 12 months, it will continue, is that sales teams now, because of the hybrid working from home, being seen to be able to get more done, be more efficient, less time on the road if you're a field salesperson, and therefore more hours on a phone or behind a computer. And therefore the perception has been generally that therefore targets can go up with less people.
Yeah.
But ultimately then that has a pressure on those people. And people are your biggest asset. You've got to look after them. So there could be pressure on salespeople, and that's something that needs to be looked at as well.
Yeah, 100% on that front, because I think a lot of businesses, certainly the ones that we're talking to, targets are increasing again for 23, 24. You've got targets going up, but you've also got some companies tightening the belts due to their overheads increasing, and also those businesses finding sales harder to come by. What might that mean for salespeople? It might mean they're going to have to do more new business, which for some people who are in a new business role at the moment, and they've got that appetite, great. But if you've got people that are in that 50-50 split, or the current job's more heavily weighted towards account management, then they may look at that and think, I'm in for that, or I'm out for it, which might have an impact on the sales team. It could mean that they need to recruit, but I think it's definitely something that we're going to see in the first quarter. There's going to be an increased push for new business across the majority of sales teams, and not everyone's going to be up for that. No,
absolutely. And I think that the final thought for me for the Q1 moving into Q2 is the market's not just going to change from candidate-led to company-led or whatever. It's going to continue to be candidate-led. And the real reason for that for the time being is still these salary pressures aren't going to go away. Because what we've spoken to all our consultants, and we've looked into the wider business, and the candidates that we're meeting day in, day out have still got quite a high expectation because of the cost of living. We're talking up to 20% pay rises, as you've touched on, to move. That versus what you've just mentioned there about the cost that businesses are having to stomach at the moment. They can't afford to inflate their whole sales team so much. So it's still going to be very difficult for them to recruit in quite a small talent pool area. So it's going to be very competitive. As daft as this sounds, and maybe as get out of jail free as this sounds, a bit more of the same than what we've seen. But I think we are getting to a level now where that salary conversation is going to become less and less, and it's going to become a bit more business as usual for me.
Yeah, I mean, typically certainly one of the trends that we've seen in the last month, which we don't expect to change in the first quarter of 23-24, is candidate salary expectations. I mean, usually when candidates are coming to us, they're wanting an increase of 5 or 10k on the basic salary. As we touched on before, there is more of a focus on moving to increase the basic salary rather than moving to get access to a larger bonus scheme. You know, that is the shape of the market currently. And I think what we're saying is you're going to still see that disconnect, which we've got at the moment. You've got companies who are tightening the belts, and you've got candidates who are saying, well, to move, I need X. And you've got this disconnect where they'll meet in the middle somewhere, but it doesn't mean it's going to be any easier for employers to fill the vacancies than what it was now. If anything, it'll remain the same, possibly a little bit, maybe a little bit harder as well. Okay, but it's going to be competitive nonetheless, I think. Absolutely. Okay, so to round off then, Rob, and leave the audience with some actionable takeaways, which we love doing. How can employers position themselves to recruit effectively this coming financial year?
So first one, reviewing your recruitment process. And that's done in two ways. We've talked about this on previous pods, etc. It's done in two ways. One, you have an inward look at your own recruitment process, maybe put yourself into the shoes of you going through a process. The second way of doing it is having, and bit of a plug from our point of view, is having a sit down with your go-to recruitment partners. And this is the best time of year to do it in April and May, to look at the year ahead, have a reflect on 22, 23, what went well, what didn't go so well, look at the data, look at the numbers, look at the insights, and see if anything needs to change. That's the first thing, and that should be your immediate action point to make sure you're ahead of the curve. Secondly, if you are recruiting directly, which a hell of a lot of businesses are doing and will always do, let's be super thoughtful about the quality of your adverts. I saw a fantastic piece on LinkedIn the other day, and I can't remember for the life of me who posted it. It was someone in our industry, in the recruitment world, that said, you've got to see an advert as a piece of marketing. So many badly written and not very good adverts out there.
100%.
So make sure that you're really looking at the quality of your advert. What is it in it for the candidate to click and apply? What is it in for them to join your business? What are you offering them? And also, what's the long-term potential of that role? Really think about the language used. And off the back of that, the third point, candidate engagement is absolutely key, and that's never going to change. And what I mean by candidate engagement, though, is moving away from literally just looking at people's CVs. Let's pick up the phone. Let's get involved with them. Let's have a conversation, even if it's a 15-minute chat, if you're recruiting directly, to understand the human being behind that CV, because you will open up a massive talent pool to you, rather than just focusing on what's written down on a bit of paper.
Yeah. 100%. Brilliant. Great tips, Rob. And on that note, we'll round off this episode. So thank you very much for coming on.
That's a pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, my pleasure to have you. Absolutely brilliant. Thanks for that, Rob. And thank you for all the listeners listening this week. And be sure to tune in next week, where I'll have my colleague Sophie Mendham on, and we'll be delving back into the world of marketing recruitment. So that wraps up another episode of the Recruitment Roundup podcast. Thank you very much for listening to the show, to watching the show. We really appreciate your support. It would be absolutely fantastic if you could give us a rating on Apple, on Spotify, give us a review. Any feedback really helps and is massively appreciated. So thank you once again for joining us, and we will hopefully see you again next week.